Living with my best friend Chris was pretty much everything I'd imagined. Late night gaming sessions, sharing our favorite takeout, and having someone to complain to about everything from classes to relationships. Chris and I had been friends since high school, so moving in together for college felt like the natural next step. We'd always had an easygoing friendship, the kind where we could joke around and tease each other without ever crossing a line. But one day, something happened that changed the way I looked at him, and maybe even the way he looked at me. It was a typical Friday morning. Chris and I had stayed up way too late watching a movie, and I'd managed to hit the shower before he woke up. As I let the warm water wash away my sleepiness, I heard a noise, faint but unmistakable, the creak of the bathroom door opening. I froze, caught between confusion and embarrassment. Chris and I were close, but not so close that either of us would just barge in on the other without reason. My mind raced, wondering if he'd forgotten I was in here, or if he needed something important. "Chris?" I called out, but the only response was silence. Out of curiosity, I tilted my head to peek out of the shower curtain, expecting him to realize his mistake and leave immediately. Instead, I caught a glimpse of him standing there, his gaze fixed on me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Shock? Curiosity? Something else? Our eyes met for a split second before he seemed to snap out of it, muttering a quick, "Sorry, man," and practically sprinting out of the bathroom. The door shut behind him with a bit too much force, leaving me alone in a haze of confusion and, admittedly, a bit of adrenaline. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that it was just an innocent mistake. Maybe he'd forgotten something and didn't realize I was in the shower. But a part of me couldn't ignore the look in his eyes, the way he hadn't moved immediately to leave. The rest of the day, I couldn't get that moment out of my head. Every time I glanced at Chris, I found myself wondering if he was thinking about it too. But he acted as if nothing had happened, chatting with me about our plans for the weekend and complaining about his workload like usual. Later that evening, we sat down to eat dinner, the awkwardness from the morning still lingering in my mind. I decided to test the waters, hoping to bring it up casually and maybe get an answer that would put my mind at ease. "So, about this morning," I started, trying to keep my tone light. "Did you need something in the bathroom or—" Chris froze for a moment, his fork halfway to his mouth. He quickly recovered, but I could see the flicker of something in his eyes, a mixture of embarrassment and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Oh, that," he said, clearing his throat. "Sorry, man. I, thought you weren't in there." "Right," I replied, trying to keep my expression neutral. "It just didn't seem like you were in a hurry to leave." His cheeks turned slightly red, and he laughed it off. "Guess I was still half asleep. Didn't mean to freak you out or anything." I chuckled, pretending to let it go, but a part of me wasn't convinced. There was something about the way he avoided my gaze, the slight tension in his shoulders, that made me think there was more to it than just a sleepy mistake. I wanted to press further, to understand what he was really thinking, but I held back, unsure if I was ready to hear the answer. The weekend went by and things gradually returned to normal, or at least as normal as they could be after what had happened. Chris and I went back to our usual routine, and I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking it, that it really had been an innocent accident. But every so often, I'd catch him glancing at me with a look that was different from before, subtle, maybe even subconscious, but enough to make me wonder. One evening, as we sat on the couch binge-watching a series, I felt the tension between us growing. It was as if there was an unspoken question hanging in the air, a question neither of us was ready to ask. I found myself glancing over at him, watching the way he laughed at the jokes on screen, his relaxed posture, the way his eyes would dart over to me every now and then, as if to check if I was watching him too. I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to his accidental glance in the shower than either of us was willing to admit. And the thought of that possibility sent a jolt of excitement through me, mingled with a hint of uncertainty. I didn't know where this was going, but one thing was clear. Whatever was between us was more than just a simple friendship. After that weekend, the tension between Chris and me only grew. Every little interaction felt heightened, charged with an energy that hadn't been there before. I found myself overanalyzing every look, every comment, every moment of silence. Was I imagining it? Or was there really something different in the way he looked at me? One afternoon, as we sat in the living room scrolling through our phones, I felt the urge to bring it up again. The unanswered questions from that morning in the shower had been nagging at me, and I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the conversation forever. But each time I tried to find the right words, I found myself hesitating, afraid of what I might find out. "Hey, Chris," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. He looked up from his phone, his expression relaxed. "Yeah?" I hesitated, feeling my pulse quicken. "About that morning, in the bathroom. Are you sure there wasn't something else going on?" He laughed, but it felt forced. "Come on, man, you're not still hung up on that, are you?" I shrugged, forcing a smile. "I guess it just felt weird, that's all." Chris looked away, scratching the back of his neck. "Look, I was just half asleep, all right? Let's not make this into a thing." But the way he avoided eye contact only made me more suspicious. There was something he wasn't saying, something that felt like it was hovering just beneath the surface. I wanted to push further, to get him to open up, but I could tell he wasn't ready. And maybe, just maybe, neither was I. The next few days passed in a strange haze of awkwardness and familiarity. Chris and I continued with our usual routine, but there was a tension between us that neither of us seemed willing to address. Every time we shared a glance or brushed past each other, I felt a thrill of excitement mixed with uncertainty, as if we were both aware of an invisible line we hadn't crossed yet. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, Chris suggested we go out for drinks. It wasn't unusual for us to hit up a bar together, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way he looked at me when he made the suggestion, or the way he lingered in the doorway as if waiting for my answer. "Sure," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's go." We found ourselves in a cozy bar not far from our apartment, sharing a couple of beers and laughing over old memories. The awkwardness seemed to melt away with each drink, replaced by the easy camaraderie that had always defined our friendship. But as the night went on, I started to notice a shift in the way he looked at me, a subtle intensity that sent a jolt through me. At one point, as he leaned in to tell a joke, I realized just how close we were sitting. His arm brushed against mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved, our eyes locked in a gaze that felt like it lasted forever. My heart pounded as I wondered if he was feeling the same pull, the same inexplicable connection that had been growing between us since that morning in the shower. "Dude, you're quiet tonight," he said, breaking the silence but not moving away. "What's going on?" I hesitated, feeling a surge of courage mixed with nerves. "I could ask you the same thing." Chris laughed, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a nervousness, maybe even a hint of vulnerability. "Guess we've both got some stuff on our minds, huh?" "Maybe," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. For the rest of the night, we skirted around the unspoken question that seemed to hang in the air, neither of us willing to cross that final line. By the time we left the bar, the tension between us was nearly palpable, a quiet hum that lingered in the air as we walked home side by side. When we got back to the apartment, Chris hesitated at the door, glancing over at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was something different in his gaze, a softness that made my chest tighten. "Good night," he said, his voice low. "Yeah, good night," I replied, unable to shake the feeling that we were both on the verge of something big, something that could change everything. As I lay in bed that night, I replayed every moment, every look, every word. Part of me wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was reading too much into our friendship. But another part of me, the part that couldn't stop thinking about him, knew that something real was happening between us. And I couldn't ignore it any longer. The days after our night out only deepened the tension between us. Chris and I continued our usual routines, but there was an unspoken understanding, a lingering feeling that neither of us could ignore. Every time we crossed paths in the apartment, I felt my heart race, wondering if he was feeling the same pull I was. One night, after hours of lying awake, I heard footsteps in the hall. It was well past midnight, and curiosity got the best of me. I sat up and opened my door slightly, just in time to see Chris heading toward the kitchen. I hesitated, then decided to join him, hoping this would be the moment we finally talked about everything. In the dim light of the kitchen, I found him leaning against the counter, staring at the floor with a look of frustration and confusion. He looked up when I entered, giving a small, almost nervous smile. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He shrugged. "Yeah, something like that." We stood there in silence, each of us seemingly searching for words. I took a deep breath, feeling a surge of courage. If I didn't bring it up now, I might never have the chance. "Chris, I think we need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, his expression shifting, as though he knew exactly what I was referring to. "Yeah, I think you're right." I moved closer, my heart pounding as I searched his face for any sign of what he might say. "That morning in the bathroom, it's been on my mind." Chris sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I know it probably seemed weird, but..." He stopped, hesitating, his gaze flickering away from mine. "I don't know how to explain it." I swallowed, deciding to be as honest as I could. Did it mean something? Or am I just imagining things? He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something deeper, something that made my chest tighten. "I don't know what it meant," he admitted softly. "All I know is I can't stop thinking about it." His words hung in the air, a quiet confession that felt like a weight lifted from both of us. I took a step closer, feeling the tension between us grow, the unspoken questions finally coming to light. "I didn't expect this," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "But maybe there's more here than just friendship." He nodded, his expression uncertain but open. "Yeah, I've been feeling the same thing, but I didn't want to mess things up." For a moment, we stood there in silence, both of us absorbing the reality of what we'd just admitted. The air between us felt charged, the distance shrinking as we took a step closer, our gazes locked in an intensity I'd never felt before. In a quiet, almost hesitant movement, he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. The touch sent a jolt through me, a confirmation of the connection we'd both been feeling but hadn't dared to act on. I squeezed his hand, feeling a sense of relief and excitement that was almost overwhelming. "This is new for me," he said quietly, his voice filled with vulnerability. "I've never felt this way before." "I get it," I replied, my own nerves showing. "I didn't expect this either." We shared a small, nervous laugh, each of us still unsure but willing to explore whatever this was. For the first time in weeks, the tension between us felt lighter, as if acknowledging it had taken away the weight of secrecy. We spent the rest of the night talking, sharing our fears, our confusion, and our excitement. It was a strange feeling, discovering something so new and unexpected with someone who had been my best friend for years. But it felt right, like a door we'd opened together, stepping into uncharted territory with a trust that had always been there. As the sun began to rise, we realized just how long we'd been talking. Neither of us wanted to leave the moment, but the exhaustion was starting to catch up with us. "Maybe we should get some sleep," I suggested, glancing at the clock. Chris smiled, a look of contentment on his face. "Yeah. But let's do this again. I don't want to leave things unsaid anymore." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me at his words. "Neither do I." As we went our separate ways to our rooms, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. The uncertainty was still there, but now it was mixed with a quiet excitement, a promise of something new that we would face together. The following days felt like a dream, one where every unspoken thought and quiet glance held a new depth. Chris and I had spent years as best friends, But now everything was different. Knowing we both felt something more brought a thrill to every interaction, and our connection felt electric, charged with the excitement of something undiscovered. Still, we both hesitated, unsure of how to navigate this new territory. Our friendship had always been easy, natural, but now there was an added layer of anticipation in every moment. I found myself looking for excuses to be near him, to brush against him, to see if he felt that same spark. One evening, as we sat watching a movie, the air between us was thick with tension. We'd chosen to sit closer than usual, and as the scenes played out on the screen, I felt his arm casually resting on the back of the couch behind me. It was a small gesture, something he'd done 100 times before, but now it felt like a silent invitation. I turned to look at him, catching his eye. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the background noise of the movie fading away. The unspoken question was there, hanging in the air, and I knew we were both waiting for the other to make a move. Without thinking, I reached out, placing my hand on his arm, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my touch. He didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted closer, his gaze never leaving mine. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah, it's more than okay." With that simple answer, something shifted between us. He leaned in, his hand gently resting on my shoulder, his eyes searching mine as if for permission. And then, closing the final distance, he pressed his lips to mine in a kiss that was soft, tentative, but filled with all the emotions we'd kept hidden for so long. The kiss deepened, and I felt a rush of warmth, a sense of rightness that I couldn't put into words. This was Chris, my best friend, the person who had always been there for me. And yet, it felt like I was discovering him all over again, as if seeing him through new eyes. When we finally pulled back, both of us were breathless, caught between excitement and the overwhelming realization of what we'd just shared. "Wow," he murmured, a slight smile playing on his lips. "That was something." I laughed, feeling the tension in my chest ease. "Yeah, it definitely was." We spent the rest of the night talking, our hands still intertwined, exploring this new layer of our relationship with a mixture of curiosity and relief. The fear of losing our friendship had held us back, but now it felt like we were moving forward together, ready to embrace whatever came next. Over the next few days, we found ourselves drifting into a new rhythm, one where casual touches and quiet glances became a regular part of our lives. It was as if we'd been waiting for this all along, and now that we'd crossed the line, there was no turning back. One afternoon, as we lounged on the couch, Chris looked over at me, his expression serious. "So, where does this leave us?" I hesitated, feeling the weight of his question. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "But I do know that I want to be with you. I want to see where this goes." His face softened and he reached out, taking my hand in his. "Same here. I don't know what this all means, but I'm willing to find out. Together." The uncertainty was still there, but now it was accompanied by a sense of excitement, a shared commitment to navigating this new chapter together. We didn't have all the answers, but for the first time it felt like we were on the same page, ready to take on whatever challenges came our way. With each passing day, Chris and I grew more comfortable in our new relationship, allowing ourselves to embrace the connection that had once seemed impossible. The transition from friends to something more felt natural, and every moment we spent together confirmed what I'd felt from the start. This was where I wanted to be. One evening, after we'd returned from a long day of classes, we decided to order takeout and settle in for a quiet night together. As we ate, we talked about everything, from our plans for the weekend to memories from high school, and it felt like we were reconnecting on an even deeper level. When we'd finished eating, Chris looked at me, his expression serious. "You know, I never thought I'd be here with you like this. It's like everything I thought I knew about myself got flipped upside down." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "Same here," I didn't expect this, but I'm glad it happened. He reached over, taking my hand in his. So, what does that make us? The question hung in the air, and I could see the vulnerability in his gaze, the fear of putting a label on something so new and precious. But as I looked back at him, I felt a surge of certainty. I wanted to be with him, not just as his friend, but as his partner, his boyfriend. If you're asking me if I want us to be together, the answer is yes, I replied, feeling a smile spread across my face. He let out a small laugh, relief and happiness lighting up his eyes. Good, because that's exactly what I want too. With that, we sealed our commitment with a gentle kiss, each of us reassured by the certainty that this was the beginning of something real, something lasting. The fear that had once held us back had been replaced by a sense of excitement, a feeling that we were on the cusp of a future we were building together. Over the next few weeks, our relationship continued to grow. We learned to balance our roles as friends and partners, finding comfort in both the familiarity and the newness of our connection. It was exhilarating, waking up every day with the knowledge that we had chosen each other, that our friendship had evolved into something even more meaningful. One afternoon, as we walked through the campus park, Chris looked over at me, a mischievous grin on his face. "Remember when you caught me in the bathroom?" I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through me at the memory. "Hard to forget." He rolled his eyes, but his smile was genuine. "I still don't know what came over me that day, but I guess I'm glad it happened. Otherwise, we might never have figured all of this out." I nodded, reaching over to take his hand. "Yeah, it's funny how life works sometimes." We walked hand in hand, the sun setting in the distance, casting a warm glow over everything. The journey we'd taken to get here had been unexpected, filled with questions and uncertainty. But now, it all felt worth it. Together, we had built something beautiful, something we knew would stand the test of time. As we returned to our apartment that evening, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Chris was more than my best friend. He was my partner, my confidant, the person I wanted by my side for whatever lay ahead. And as we settled into our quiet routine, I realized that we were no longer defined by the past or the uncertainty that had once kept us apart. We were simply two people who had chosen each other, and that was more than enough. This journey of friendship turning into love reminds us that sometimes the people we've known the longest can still surprise us in the best ways. The courage to confront those unexpected feelings and open up to something new can lead to connections we never thought possible. Have you ever felt something deeper for someone you thought you knew? Is there someone in your life who might mean more to you than you realize? Take a moment to reflect on the relationships that have shaped you. Sometimes stepping out of your comfort zone can lead to the most meaningful experiences. Thank you for joining us in this story of friendship and love. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more stories that inspire, challenge, and touch the heart. Remember, love can often be found in the most unexpected places.